on the way home.
Okay, this is the College Prep English class at Excellence in Education on Cinco de Mayo, 2016. Let me share the screen. And we're off and going. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to focus on this week. One of them is concept of the autodidact. That is the person who learns how to learn. And I remember once talking to my daughter about her homeschooling. Of course, she was homeschooled all the way through. She went to this class, as a matter of fact. And her response was, I wasn't really homeschooled. I was self-schooled.
Yeah,
I taught myself.
That's how I see it as well.
And indeed, sometimes that's necessary. Parents can, but don't always provide all kinds of useful things. And of course, I'm creating a rather idealized situation here, and perhaps a rather fictionalized situation in the essay that I put together, which Nicholas so very kindly edited for me. So that's one of the things we're going to go through. And specifically, I wanted to talk about a few famous autodidacts. There are far more of them than one would expect, because some autodidacts do very well in school. It's just they find that they can learn even more outside of school. And some of them regard school with just such contempt because they realize they can do so much better outside of school. And of course, Einstein was one of those, and a number of others. Actually, let's take a look at our agenda. I have 3 of them here. I thought I'd just throw up and we could talk about a little bit because they came up. Okay. Our agenda this week, and this is an important little point I wanted to make at the beginning. I was asked sort of what my background in English was, and then realized, of course, the important answer to that question is you don't have to define some sort of educational regimen in order to explain expertise in a subject. And in fact, it's perfectly possible to acquire that kind of expertise in completely different ways. Importantly, with the tools available today, it's possible to learn just about anything without necessarily proceeding through an established regimen. Acquisition of some skills requires an expert role model. Learning a language requires a native speaker. And a musical instrument requires studying the technique of a master. But the good homeschooling autodidact does not require a teacher. Learning is perhaps the most rewarding activity one can engage in, and it doesn't have to be regimented, difficult, or onerous. Revel in the opportunity. Now,
Learning is usually difficult, though. Going to class or just learning something new,
It depends.
it's difficult.
it can be. It depends on how it works. When you first learned English, was it difficult?
No,
No.
mastering it is.
Yeah, mastering is, that's a different story.
I think actually, had you heard English from a master at the beginning, the mastery of it would have been automatic. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And so many of us find it difficult later in life to learn language because theoretically that language window closes. But my contention is, and indeed the reason for all of the auditory learning, is that it doesn't really close. You listen to it enough, it will find its way into your speech centers. Do you agree with me on that one?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think so.
I'd like to see that
Exposed
soon, though.
You'd like to see it happen soon?
Yeah.
The only thing I could suggest there is perhaps increasing the ratio of good language to not so good language that you shove into your ear every week. And then, of course, responding to it, debating with someone who uses the language well, gives you that interactive interlocutor with whom you can really increase your language ability. So I thought I'd throw up some autodidacts. His picture didn't come out the first time, so it didn't get into the original version. It disappeared, so I had to find another one. This fellow is mentioned, and of course, he plays a role in the essay that we talked about. Robert Smalls. Now, this is a relatively minor event in his career, but he did teach himself to read and write in 9 months. He's described as doing it, which I think is significant, because if we look at the contention of this fellow here, John Taylor Gatto, he's, of course, an award-winning teacher who then really denounced the system as being irreparable, and went off in his own direction. He's one of the founders, in a way, of modern homeschooling. He maintains that a motivated student could learn all of the basics that are required in school in about 100 hours. Now, that may be a little bit optimistic, but when you stop and think about how much you can learn when you're really motivated, then have you really been motivated? It's amazing what you can get through if you want to. And there are so few people who go to school who've ever actually felt that motivation and experienced that rapidity of language acquisition or skills acquisition, that it's a foreign world to them. They don't believe that it can actually happen. But indeed, someone who really wants to do it, and indeed Smalls needed to do it, given where he was and what he wanted to do. Did anybody look him up besides simply the references in the paper that you read? Did you do any research on him?
On Robert Smalls?
Right.
I don't believe so.
No.
Okay. Interesting character. He did not follow the Harriet Tubman route from the South. He took over a ship and picked up the families of a number of other crew members and managed to sail it out to the Union blockade, and therefore defected, if you like, to the North during the Civil War. But then he went on to demonstrate a great deal of ability in a lot of different ways, became a captain, ship's captain, and eventually a major general and U.S. congressman. I had no idea that there was a black U.S. congressman in the 19th century. And yet this was really an amazing accomplishment. Went back to South Carolina and bought the plantation that he had been a slave in.
Oh.
Okay.
That must be a good feeling.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, the former owner, the former slave
Started
owner,
working
when
for
she
him.
was in her dotage, he invited her to come and stay her last years in the plantation. Interesting character, anyway. Why is he missing from the textbook, do you suppose?
Good question.
You said a good example.
That's a good question. I think that some people think maybe he's not a good example. Why might they think that?
Well, people are constantly pushing the idea that it's all the white man's fault. So then when you have a successful black slave owner who owns a plantation and owns slaves, there are a few other people other than him. It's the complete opposite of what they're saying.
I don't believe that was the case here at all, because of course he didn't become a plantation owner till after the Civil War. And there's no indication that he ever owned slaves. But no, I think one of the other big differences is that he was indeed a pirate, a mutineer, a traitor, if you'd like. I mean, he was born in South Carolina. He defected to the North. Is that treacherous? So those are reasons perhaps that he's not put up on the pedestal. And it's an interesting and important question to ask is being a hero. Is a hero one who fights for a cause regardless of whether it's a sanctioned and legal cause? Those are questions worth asking, and I think that may well be one of the reasons he was never considered. Aaron Swartz is in the same category, I think. How many of you heard of Aaron Swartz?
I've heard his name before. I don't really recognize him, his works or anything.
I really didn't know that much about him at all till I saw a documentary on him, which I think you folks might find interesting. It doesn't really apply to our class, so I won't put it in the agenda. But his autodidact qualifications are quite wonderful. He went to school and he just realized the school wasn't giving him anything that he couldn't get much faster and much more effectively outside of school. So he was a dropout who taught himself, and he was a product of the computer age, really. He was one of the founders of Reddit, and he was also the developer of the RSS protocol.
Is he still alive?
No, he's not.
Yeah, he killed himself, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I've heard of him before. Yeah. I
Yeah.
heard about it.
Yeah.
No, wait forward there. Oh, he killed himself, right?
Well, one of the things he did was create an earlier version of Sci-Hub and downloaded the entire contents of a database, the JSTOR database of scientific journals. And he was charged with all kinds of terrible crimes and was facing much longer sentence than a murderer, for example, for having downloaded things and killed himself. But he had really quite a remarkable career. And I recommend looking at what he did. And what he did, of course, he did for entirely altruistic reasons. He made his fortune easily and quickly and couldn't care less about it. His efforts were entirely devoted to idealism and what he thought was best for the world. Okay, Tolle, you probably haven't come across Tolle. I liked his story so much. He wasn't really a rebel as a kid. He, at age 13, however, and he describes this really as his only rebellious act, he refused to go to school. He just could not stand school.
The people there or what?
Well, I believe it was a combination, but certainly he had utter contempt for the schooling process. And it's a terribly regimented thing. And school in Germany is has some really horrible things about it. One is expected to take an exam at age 12 that basically determines which way you're going in life. And at 12, if you don't get it right, there are a number of countries where this is the case. And then you've got to pass your Abitur at the end of high school, otherwise it's really an awful lot of pressure.
So it's the
And I don't know whether that pressure had to do with his decision.
yeah. So it's Germany's school system.
The German school system, yes. German school system has some very good things about it too. For one thing, higher education is essentially free. That's worth thinking about. But it does have a very traditional, rigid approach to things. His parents did not get along well. And they split up. His father went to Spain. And when he decided not to go to school anymore, his mother didn't know what to do with him. So she sent him to live with his father in Spain. He was a fairly laid-back fellow and said, okay, do you want to go to school? Nope. Okay.
Simple
And
as
so Toller enjoyed doing the kind of study he wanted to do. He read literature, he studied languages, he studied astronomy, worked on his own. Later on, he fell into, sort of accidentally and without any real background or preparation or qualifications, a job in London teaching German and Spanish, in both of which he excelled, having learned Spanish pretty much as a native language after having learned German as a native language. And so he taught there for a while, studied at night, got into University of London, graduated with a degree from the University of London, and was awarded a scholarship to do graduate school at Cambridge University. That is an amazing thing. He went and he didn't like it and dropped out, and went through a lot of other things I won't go into, but he's become one of the best-selling authors in the world, and is very highly regarded for a number of different directions. So I just liked his story. I thought that was so good. I'm not going to school. I can do a better job elsewhere. So I just thought I'd mention those three. Indeed, there are many, many more. And the problem is, of course, the piece of paper is so important. And I don't like to dissuade students from going to college or studying for a degree, because the piece of paper does still have some value, not as much value as it used to have, but probably not enough to help you pay off your loans, but still it has some value. Okay, here's this example college admissions essay by an imaginary homeschool student, and of course it's described in here as rather poorly as an imaginary student essay, which doesn't tell you whether the essay is imaginary or the student is. But let's look at it and just understand what's going on here. I attempted to put together an essay that would focus on and outline the advantages of being a homeschooler and the persuasive aspects of homeschooling that would, at least in my estimation, you tell me if you agree with me or not, increase the probability of being accepted into a university, and appealing to an admissions officer reading this essay. And so I think there are a few changes that I would make in it. All three of you have read this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, one thing I feel a little badly about is it took me about 2 hours to write it, and it took me a long time to think about what I was going to say. I wasn't really sure where this was going to go. And this I think is longer than it should be. And then, of course, I went back and diddled with it afterwards. But one of the things I keep on trying to reinforce with you folks is you get better and better at it the more you do of it. And so I haven't written something specific like this in some time. It took me a little time. And I think, however, that if I write another one, it's going to take me maybe half the time. You see what I mean? And then as you write more and more, you get better and better. Mm-hmm. In other words, practice. Hand stuff in. Okay. And so let's work on it, and you will get better. Okay, I started out with the device that is the same one that Brittany Stinson uses in hers. The in media res, in media res. It's starting out right in the middle of something, landing your reader into something she doesn't understand, doesn't know how we got here. Okay, who am I? My dad looked up from his nearly dismantled artichoke with a wink. I was a slave, a pirate, a traitor, a ship's captain, a major general, and a U.S. congressman. Who am I? Well, of course, you know who he is. But then he goes on and explains, who am I? Who said it? Name that tune, and other such dinner table and travel puzzles are a common feature in our family. One in which I take great delight, and I generally solve them with celerity and perhaps somewhat immoderate pride. Okay, one little word in there. It's not overladen with vocabulary. And then the big question, really, there is such a person, someone who has gone from slavery to high office, and indeed I was unaware of this before I discovered it. I reached for my device. I wondered how many hours my dad had spent discovering and preparing this one, and whether I'd be able to tweak the solution before the artichoke was entirely demolished. The intent here, of course, is to add that layer of detail that we were talking about. I guessed yes, and I was right. Originally, I was going to say, I guess no. It took me longer. But then I did a searching just for those factors. And indeed, I found it on the first search. The only reason I found it was this PBS special came up. And
Is this real?
I'm sorry?
Real? Did this actually happen?
Did what actually happen? No. What the background here is fictitious, but in order to make it feasible, I did a search to try to see what one would find if I looked for all of those things without having a name. Very hard to find a name when all you've got is a bunch of details. And I did put them all in and look for it, and it was there on the first search. And it was there simply because there had been a PBS special, and the PBS special had a description with all of those events listed in it. So indeed, it came up in the first search when I did it, but that made it feasible that he would have found it on the second search. And so I changed this. Yes, I was right. I got it on my second search. Unlike Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks, who are they?
Well, Rosa Parks was the little girl, the girl that didn't move from the part of the bus wherever
She was
the white people were sitting in.
Segregation.
Yeah, the
Yeah, but I
city
think
was
she was-
divided.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think she was a old lady.
Yes.
at the time.
She was-
Yeah, and Harriet Tubman was a
Well, she
she started out life as a slave, but she escaped, and then I think she went back a few times to help rescue some other slaves as well.
Exactly.
That's
The
right.
Underground Railroad. She was responsible for helping many slaves find their way to the north. Was she a lawbreaker?
No, she
Rosa
was
Parks.
doing the right thing.
Oh.
But
Well,
yeah, she was
at the
breaking
time,
the law.
yeah,
Right,
at the time,
exactly.
yes,
She
she
was
was.
a lawbreaker. If
Yeah.
she escaped in the first
Indeed.
place, that was against the law.
Mhm.
Rosa Parks was a lawbreaker too, but perhaps not quite as much as
I see a trend here.
as
go
Robert
break some
Smalls,
laws.
because after all, he was also a pirate, and he wore the captain's uniform, put on a hat, pretended to be the captain, which at a distance managed to fool the people in the harbor to think that the captain was indeed taking his own boat out.
That's fun.
Okay. So Robert Smalls of South Carolina, his sail to freedom and his rise to prominence were read to everyone, was read to everyone. I'm not sure that either one of those is really right, because
I
They both seem
I
kinda-
read it many times. At the time, seems more appropriate.
yeah, I think was actually would be just as good, if not better, at the table, and became the subject of lengthy conversation and further research, which revealed, among other things, that he had taught himself to read and write in 9 months. Now, having thrown the reader into this and said, okay, now I can figure out what's going on. This is a quiz going on at the dinner table. Now, of course, when I'm giving this to you, I'm not saying, okay, here's what you can say. I don't want you necessarily to lie in your essays, but this is what could be said, and it would be fairly impressive and persuasive. So why don't you make it true? Do you see what I mean? See what you can do with your parents. Okay, I am a homeschooler. Now we're into it. Not in the sense that I study within an insular environment under the tutelage of a pair of parental role models. No words there that anybody has any trouble with, but those are not words in most people's active vocabularies. You see, remember that, actually I don't have that chart, I've looked for it, but it's a chart that describes our active vocabulary is this little part here. Our passive vocabulary that we understand is vastly larger. And then out beyond that, we get the vocabulary that you will encounter in the masters we've been studying. But what we're using here is vocabulary that exists outside the normal everyday realm, but it's not outside most people's understanding. Certainly not an admission officer. I'm an autodidact. Okay, this might send somebody to the dictionary. I am my own teacher. Okay, you don't have to go to the dictionary. If I go ahead and
Yeah,
define it
speaking
in
of
the
which,
next
what is the
sentence.
actual definition of an autodidact? Like,
Well, think about the parts of it. Didactic means learning, or something that has to do with the learning process. Auto means, as in autobiography, means by the self, so self-learning.
okay.
I'm my own teacher. Indeed, my parents have provided me with an intriguing array of resources, including the Common Core standards, for what they're worth, and also suggestions and conundrums such as Seven Bridges of Königsberg, and Smolian's puzzles, and scientific and philosophical paradoxes. Whether one can draw a complex figure with a continuous line, fathom the apparent failure of conservation of energy in a redshifting multiverse, or predict the consequences of the impending technological singularity, which Kurzweil expects to occur before the year 2030. Three major things sort of stacked up here. And this follows Stinson's the example of references to real learning that this person has presumably encountered. You know all about these, I think, don't you? Well, you may not know the Seven Bridges of Königsberg. I'll give it to you at some point if you like. It's very simple. It's a pencil puzzle. And Smolian is the author of a book of puzzles, The Lady and the Tiger problems. They're largely Smolian problems. And then the rest of these are recent discussion in theoretical cosmology. And of course, Kurzweil, we did look at Kurzweil, didn't we, recently? He's one of the great minds of the computer age. Interesting character. I remember coming across a Kurzweil machine, which was one of the earliest plain text readers. In other words, you could actually put a book and it would read the book out in audio form. It was used in disabled student centers and things like that. But he did a lot of different things like that. But one of his pronouncements really is that I think he says it's going to be in the year 2029 that the technological singularity will take place. You've come across that before. I believe we've talked about it in here.
Possibly.
The word was coined by John von Neumann, whom we would have to consider to be the really the father of modern computers. He was the first person to think of the idea of the stored program concept. Before that, computers were built to solve a specific problem.
Oh yeah.
And then
Rid
with
of
the
that
stored
before.
program, you could load a different program into them. He did a lot of other things too. He was involved in so much. But this was a long time ago. This was theoretical. And the fact is, we're so far from that singularity even now. But what Kurzweil has proposed is that at the speed that we are improving the technology at now, we are going to reach that point by 2029 because it's accelerating exponentially. And if it continues to do so, that's what will happen. Okay, the concept of age inappropriate was never a factor in our study. And for the autonomous researcher, there is no end of worlds to explore. By Aikido, martial art I studied, to the works of Ahmed Tadema, my favorite painter, and Edvard Grieg, my favorite composer. Now, if instead of that you were to say something like Leonardo da Vinci and Beethoven, that wouldn't be nearly as impressive as something a little less mainstream. You see what I mean? Everybody's familiar with Leonardo da Vinci. Everybody knows Beethoven. So throw it off a little bit. And Aikido is also a little bit off center as well. But I think
I've never heard of that
oh, interesting.
until I Googled it today. It's like this form of kung fu that has a lot of taking down and flipping the person.
It does have a lot of flipping. It's quite different, however, from well, kung fu simply means martial art. It's Chinese, so it covers an awful lot of area. Aikido is quite different. One thing, it's not a competitive martial art. It's a martial art in which techniques are performed with full force and full speed without hurting the other person. They're specifically intended to control and defuse a situation rather than to kill your opponent.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I like it a great deal, because in a modern, very litigious age, the ability to do something effective that doesn't involve
Violence.
bodily harm is a nice alternative to have at your disposal. Tadema, I'd love to show you some of these pictures. Absolutely amazing thing. In fact, I'm tempted to bring one up if we get time and feel like it. There's one of his paintings called A Coin of Vantage, COIGN. Look that one up. And it shows a parapet and a number of ladies in this parapet, and some great bronze statue behind them. But then you can see over the edge of the parapet, and it looks like it's a mile down, you see a ship, presumably a trireme being rowed along. And just the distances involved are absolutely fascinating. There are a number of others. Anyway, it's entirely behind beside your watch here. Okay, so no end of worlds to explore to the autonomous researcher mentions those three. I have studied what suited me, including math, science, history, and I will let my language speak for itself. That's one way to say it. One of our family's favorite academic sources is the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning.
I said you should have that in italics. Was I right?
Now, I think you're probably right. It should be.
Okay.
Yeah, Unschooling and Alternative Learning, which features papers on ever-expanding and developing pedagogic systems, some of which have influenced heavily our approach to homeschooling. Yeah, a lot of this also depends on whether you're in an environment in which that kind of textual changes is actually acceptable. There's so many places, for example, Facebook, where you can't boldface anything, you can't italicize anything. And indeed, we can't boldface in this for some reason, as you discovered.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here we hit the point here of academic sources and mention an academic journal, which these people are probably unfamiliar with. But the fact that there is an academic journal focusing on alternative learning is an important factor here.
Also, I noticed when I boldfaced it and I submitted, it came up the bulk areas. It came up forward. Only when you're viewing it, it's not.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
maybe so you can like see what exactly you're correcting.
We could go in and figure out exactly what's going on in the HTML if you're really interested. You can do everything with the HTML that we were able to do with the old editor, but it's
More work.
Yeah, it takes an awful lot of fuss. For one thing, when you switch into the HTML version, there's no formatting going on there. There are no paragraphs visible, and so finding where you are is a real problem. Whenever I do that, I create a row of dots or something, then hop into it, and I can find where we're talking. Okay, this is a rather an abrupt shift. You tell me whether it's too much. Having talked about, I'm a homeschooler, and there's no end of worlds to explore in homeschooling, and this particular journal of unschooling we found useful. I pity those to whom research means working in a library. To most people, it still does. Just as medieval scholars might have pitied those whose study required working with stylus and clay tablets. A right click on a selected word or passage in my browser screen brings up an array of research tools that would astound the scholar of a decade ago, and probably sundry benighted academics of today. Look up the word benighted. Tools that allow for instant context-based full-text searches of the entirety or focused subset of academic papers and books. The references in each one of which take one ever closer to achieving a comprehensive picture of a specific realm of current scholarly literature. Probably the longest sentence in the whole thing, but indeed it gives you the entire picture of what you're doing. In fact, if the reader of this paper is anyone who's ever done any serious research, this would strike a chord and say, you mean it's that easy? Okay, with the network trove of knowledge just 2 or 3 mouse clicks away from the currently studied screen, how could anyone not exult in the study process and revel in the results? The ebook of today dwarfs the weight-content ratio of the printed book by degrees of magnitude more than paper does the clay tablet. And we know that the future of this ratio will cascade with exponentially increasing alacrity. I am born into my ideal age. Okay, you see the point being made here is, remember the part in Brittany Stinson's when it says, I'm trying to remember her exact words. I survive on curiosity. Those weren't her exact words, but you perhaps can remember what they were. But indeed, that's what the author is trying to convey. So this is really what I'm all about. And here we're doing the same thing. I'm saying, I am born into my ideal age. This is an age in which the world's knowledge is at my fingertips, and I love finding it and doing something with it. And not only that, doing what one would in a school, in a high school. In a high school, you would rarely, if ever, have occasion to really go in scholarly works, and they would not be available in high school. You find those when you go to a university, or when they become available online, as they have recently done. By the way, have you been on to Sci-Hub in the last couple of days?
Couple days? No. Is there
Okay.
a
You
change?
have been running around out there and looking for things? Yeah, Sci-Hub, the domain name, has been discontinued. They have managed it off. But that's not a serious disadvantage, because it has a number of other domain names, and perhaps more importantly, the numeric domain. And I have changed the references in our page, so you can
So you can
find
access
those
it now.
and
All right.
re-bookmark them. And interesting that it was actually possible to force this Chinese registrar to abandon the registration of that domain name. But of course, there's an enormous amount of money riding on it. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? You're telling the reader what your ambitions are and what your joys are, and indeed telling the reader there are realms, there are didactic realms, there are scholarly realms beyond things even you have thought about. You don't hit them in normal school, but in homeschool you do, or can. My parents have sought out teachers for me whenever they are unable to provide what I need, an increasingly frequent occurrence. Now here I have to apologize also, because I like that particular device, the dash. It really works for me when
I like it
putting
as well.
things together, but it probably makes my writing somewhat recognizable and identifiable. So my college prep English teacher at the Homeschool Center, a retired professor, introduced us to online scholarly journals, both open access and paywall obviated. Good, look that one up. Together with research methods, practices, and ethics. On my own, I created more, including web scouring software, parenthesis, Python, with which I can create graphical statistic analyses in real time based on networked activity on subjects ranging from statistical subject and keyword breakdowns of ongoing discussions and breaking news in cryptography and archaeological finds. I have also learned that there are great minds to be communicated with everywhere, many of them willing to answer intelligent questions from an anonymous inquirer. Caltech's Sean Carroll even answers cogent forum posts with his doubts about universality of the conservation of energy and red shifting. That one just came up a couple of days ago. A friend of mine, physicist, was on a forum that was being led apparently by Sean Carroll, and he asked that question. Well, isn't that red shifted photon, isn't it now lacking energy that it originally had? And if so, where is that energy? And what about that universal that we've always assumed to be universal in physics, the conservation of energy? To which Carol responded, well, we can't rely upon the conservation of energy in that situation. We don't have an answer for it. So that was interesting. It wasn't I who posed the question. It was indeed a PhD in physics who posed the question, but it was all on an online forum. And so perfect kind of thing to be able to reference. Okay. Now, one of the things I really want to tie this to, and I know it's difficult for you, your families work differently and they inspire you in different ways, and perhaps they don't really get into the more naughty epistemological questions of the universe. You're going to bring those up though, right? What does epistemology mean?
Epistemology.
I've thrown it at you a couple of times
Oh, no,
last
I've heard
week.
it
I know
before.
you've looked it up. I'm sorry.
I said I know I've heard it before, and I know you've said it before. I'm trying to remember the definition.
It's commonly used in philosophy, and specifically, it has to do with the limits of knowledge. When you're trying to determine what is and is not knowable, that is an epistemological question. And so, so here, of course, I mentioned Python. Python, in fact, is so easy to do that with. It's got features built right in. Go out on the net and grab that page, bring it back here, go through the whole thing, do a keyword search. Now, you folks, I believe, have read, at least I asked you to, that scholarly paper on learning in forums and lurking in forums, right?
I think so. When was it assigned? Was it
Last week? Now we're gonna have to go back and I'll point at it in the agenda there.
Yeah, reposted
Yeah.
Anyway, my point was there, of course. And what was my point? Well, we'll figure it out. Okay, we'll hit it again eventually. Anyway, my point here is that we're bringing this back into the family. We're rounding out the structure by starting with the dad coming up with this puzzle, and then he goes off and he wanders around, solves the puzzle. They discuss it, and it goes off into these other things. Then he goes back again to my dad, was now picking the thistly center from the artichoke and talking about the world I would see and he would not, and how it differed from that of his youth. Typical parent talk, to which we kids rarely pay any attention and have so much trouble believing. One phone in the hallway on a short cord. It used to be you had to stand up to use the phone, you know, the old-fashioned ones with the crank on them. And the phone was stuck to the wall. You couldn't take it anywhere. You put the earpiece. That was before my time. But in my time, it was one phone in the house. It was on a short cord, and it sat in the hallway. A TV with rabbit ears antenna and 5 watchable channels.
That's so old.
What's that?
That's so old.
Yeah, but yes, that's really all there was. Channel 2 and Channel 4.
Yeah.
And Channel 5. And then 7 sort of worked. 13 was never really there, and there was 11. That was it. And then later on, PBS or later on, UHF came along. But that's what it was. And then his response, of course, is, "I am ever so ready for the current age, and will be ready for the next one. My heroes are Dickens, Twain, Shaw, Einstein, Stephen Wolfram, Aaron Swartz, Eckhart Tolle, and now Robert Smalls. People who learned how to learn on their own, outside of or despite their schooling, and who aspired to more than was expected of them, achieving the startlingly unexpected. My parents can only guess what they have wrought in my homeschooling. I am similarly clueless, but confidently optimistic." I'd ended it there initially, but then I added this last paragraph, which I think was sort of important. Humanity will be facing many challenges in the near future, though it's not clear which will pose the greatest danger. Economic meltdown, nuclear warfare or disasters, ecological vicissitudes, or what seems most imminently probable to me, the technological singularity. There also seems little doubt that major decisions which will ultimately determine the future of humanity are being made badly. I feel the human race and the Earth's habitability are worth preserving, and I hope to make my contribution there. I felt that much as most of these winning papers do, it makes a lot of sense to come up with what I want to do with my life, what I want to do with my education, what kind of effect I want to have. And so it made sense to line this up that way. Okay, now, is this useful to you? Because, of course, the rule is never steal somebody else's words. You don't have to, you can do better. But you've got some ideas here that you can weave into your own, make them your own, use your own references, your own experiences in classrooms and so forth. But you do know where all these tools are. You do have your computers all prepared with the plugins that you need in order to do this kind of search, for example. By the way, I put one together yesterday that does exactly what I'm describing here. It searches Sci-Hub for whatever, if I were to grab this, for example, and say, I want to search Sci-Hub, I don't have it on this computer. But you see, on this computer, I've got the search Yahoo Search Dictionary, Google Translation, StringNet. I've got those installed here. But on the other one, I installed one that did take one off to Sci-Hub.
You have another computer?
Yes.
What is it?
I have an old desktop, which I don't work well with this kind of keyboard as well as the other one. But on that one, I may have it on this machine. I don't think so, though. I have Tor running, and I had to run it under Tor in order to make it work properly.
Mm-hmm.
But it did work, and I was able to just highlight something and go off and search academic papers, the entire realm of academic papers, based on a highlighted passage on the screen, exactly as I'm describing in the paper. Okay. So anyway, I hope this is of some value to you. This one focuses on science, presumes that you're going to go into some sort of science major. It would be nice, and I don't know that I feel like sitting down writing another one, but it would be nice to have one that focuses perhaps on a fine arts major, maybe even a literature major, or even a classics major or something like that. What majors are you folks going to assume?
I'm thinking about physics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I mean, I hope to get into archaeology, but I mean, in the U.S., you usually have to do that through anthropology or history major, so probably something like that.
What I didn't quite hear what you wanted to get into eventually.
Oh, archaeology.
Oh, I see. Uh-huh.
So yeah, I guess I'd probably have to do anthropology, maybe history.
Yeah. That's a little harder to find something in that world, but indeed, it makes perfect sense to want to go on.
Brian, I'm just curious, what do you want to major
Yes,
in?
what is your major, Greg?
My major. I haven't exactly thought of it, but as of right now, I'm leaning towards business.
Mhm.
That's just the basic. But
And what do you think of University of the People? Do you think that might?
actually, this coming senior year I'm going to be taking classes here and at Citrus,
Mhm.
and then hopefully transfer to USC after some years at Citrus after high school.
Mhm.
My mom works there, and there's some benefits, so
Mhm.
that'd be cool.
All sounds like wonderful things to go into.
Mm-hmm.
Think twice before you go
Oh
into
yeah,
a big
definitely.
debt.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom, what field at USC is she working in?
She's in operating rooms.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
I actually know somebody who is like the owner of USC's medical, the medical district.
That's cool.
His name is Ted Budge.
Ted Budge.
Yeah.
I'll ask her maybe. I haven't heard of that name, but
All those doctors and nurses, therapists. So he manages them.
mm-hmm.
He manages everything in
Yeah.
that medical district.
The head honcho.
Okay, I'm sorry it takes so much time, but since nobody else handed in something, we we had some time to look at it. And thank you for your comments on it. Okay, let's go on from autodidacts here and resources. This resource we just went over. I don't intend to post this anywhere online, but it's hard to know where it might end up because after all, it's been sent out in the email. So in theory, grabbing chunks of it would not end up producing something searchable on the net. But still, use the ideas. That's the important thing. And come up with more. Can you think of other advantages to homeschooling that weren't mentioned in there? I mean,
Maybe you can learn at your own pace because everybody learns differently. As I've observed in public school, as everybody goes at one pace, regardless of
right, and
their
there is
level of
such a glacial
Less
pace.
distractions.
Interaction is
that really
always a
depends,
tricky
yeah.
one. You see,
Yeah.
they're trying now to get schools to teach collaboration, but they don't know how to do it. And the kids don't know how to do it.
Mhm.
And as a result, you get a little
Clueless
collaborative
individuals.
group in which one person's doing all the work and the others aren't
Mhm.
doing anything, and there's
Just
no way
writing
to
down the
grade it.
answers.
It's collaboration is very important. And it's something, in fact, that's treated in those papers, one of which I asked you folk to read. We'll take a look at it. Sci-Hub, by the way, has been, the link has been fixed. Library Genesis link was not broken. Doesn't look as though it is a link here. I did throw in the IP address in it before it disappeared, just in case, so you could use the IP. Okay. So the things that I tried to incorporate into that paper were detail, theme, topics of history, science, philosophy, and language. Rhetorical devices. One of the language devices that I did not use and I felt a little bad about was metaphor. And a lot of the good papers that I've been reading do use metaphor. And in fact, there was one paper here. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, that's something else I want to look at. Okay. Mental block is a nasty old hermit who lives in the gullies and ravines of my mind. He makes a living by slinging nets across my neural canals and catches my thoughts as they swim toward the great spawning ground where writing is born. I rarely come across a more complete and extended metaphor than that one. Do you see what I mean?
Mhm.
The metaphor is a nice device to use, and
It is.
it's one that does tend to be appreciated.
Because if the right metaphor is used, it'll stick in the person's
That's true.
mind. And
That's
just-
true. It sticks in your mind. It sticks in your
Like
mind.
the Brittany Stinson's essay with the El Dorado and the conquistadors.
Exactly.
It's a good metaphor.
So I can expect papers from all of you next week.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Yes.
2.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Trust me, the
Depending
more
on
you do
finals,
it, the
yeah.
better it gets. And I'm sure that mine would have improved if it were the 3rd or 4th one that I'd written in the last month or 2. Okay, so we have updated assignments, and you folks have been doing that and drawing on the vocabulary journals here for doing your writing, which I'm sure you're working on. Language immersion. Did you get a chance to watch this? I hope you did.
Which one?
Yes, the award ceremony.
Your award
Oh,
ceremony.
yeah.
Isn't that the weirdest thing?
Sweet, yeah,
the
the Swedish
musical
people
interlude.
and
Yeah.
the
So strange. I was like, it's nice. I mean, it was good music.
and Edward's Snowden was catching the webcast live. He was watching it through the webcast.
Oh yes, oh yes. It's interesting how they have the parliament put together there. Did you notice everybody has an aisle seat?
Mm-hmm.
All these aisles going up and down.
Yeah.
They're just two benches.
And the music at the start, the orchestra, that was, I don't know why they had that.
I was
It's kinda
surprised at the
mixed up.
presence of music, but I didn't object. I mean, they're fascinating.
Yeah.
The instruments, in fact, were very interesting. They had cellos and harmonica. Okay, interesting. And a nyckelharpa. This is that device, that bowed device with the keys on it, which was, you listen to it, and in so many ways it came so close to some of the wonderful works of Bach. It very similar in its structure to part of the Bach chaconne, but very limited at the same time because it was clearly a diatonic instrument intended for use in one key. So although it used all of the neighboring chords and harmonies, it did not modulate into other keys the way all classical music pieces do. It was instead very soundly based on folk background. But that was fascinating. I really thought they stopped and have some amazing little presentations in between. And the standing ovation, I thought was something. The whole Swedish Parliament and did a standing ovation before and after the Snowden presentation and acceptance speech. What did you think of Antje Jackel?
She did a good job with her English.
Considering, yeah.
Yeah, and she had her Swedish accent,
Yeah.
pronouncing all the W's
Assuming that
as a V.
English was her second language, right?
I suspect it probably wasn't, though it
Really?
would be if she were Swedish. She's actually German. And so Swedish is at least second language, probably third or something. So, yeah. But her English was indeed fine and much better than.
Adequate.
Yes.
Adequate. It was adequate.
Adequate. Okay. Yeah. Acceptable. Acceptable. And a very, very different approach, I think. First of all, just the concept of having a female archbishop.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the Gatto one you did watch, right?
Yes. What about the other one? Which one was that?
Oh, yes. What did you think of Rusbridger?
Which one? That was the.
He was the editor-in-chief of the Guardian newspaper.
Okay. Yeah, he was good. I'm trying to remember the name of the African American guy. What was his?
I don't remember.
Right? I'm trying to. It's on here, right? Isn't it?
The one of the award recipients, right?
I don't think it was that one. It was kind of like a Q&A. Here, I'll bring it up on the agenda.
Oh, just a second. It's we're talking about Baldwin down here, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Baldwin's picture has vanished. That happens. What I'm doing when I put them up here, of course, is just linking into a picture on somebody else's page. And if somebody takes it down, it disappears. So James Baldwin is there, but isn't there. Okay. Yeah, Baldwin, I thought, did a fine job. And I don't think Buckley was really attempting to argue against Baldwin's contentions.
Yeah.
Buckley, on the other hand, is absolutely amazing with language. I just love listening to it, even if I don't agree with what he's talking about.
No, yeah, he's really good wielder of the language. His oratory is nice.
Yeah, and so that one was an interesting one.
And then this one here, I really like this one.
Yeah, tell me
There's a
what
lot of
points
good points, and it was interesting, really
It
interesting.
asks some really good questions. And
Yeah, definitely.
it makes one stop and think a little bit. And asking, okay, what sort of axioms are presupposed upon me that I have never questioned? And
Yeah,
perhaps
definitely.
to bring into question. And of course, in my case, it's a little bit different because my parents taught me to think for myself. I guess I'll never managed to get out of that one.
Something fascinating is when he said, by the time we learn that we can think what we want, we've already been established a thought process or something.
Exactly.
something how I said it like that.
There are always exceptions, however.
Mhm.
You do meet people who were brought up with one
Yeah.
mindset,
One mindset
and
and
managed
completely takes a
to
360.
to retool and go into another one. Not necessarily always an improvement.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's not necessarily an improvement
But
the majority of
it's-
the time.
It
In
does
some
happen.
cases, yes.
But it's worth standing back and looking at it and
Mhm.
saying, okay, let's rework things a little bit. Okay, I did, of course, here ask you to have collected material for your writing college admission essays, and I'm sure you've done that, and you're ready to jump in and write them now. Just write admissions essay and post it. Then we've got that list of words, and then I suggest another project here. Please read and prepare a report on more scholarly journal articles covering subjects of interest to you. I could tell you what's of interest to you, but that's sort of stupid of me to try.
Yeah, that's
So,
a bit.
right, if you ask, well, what's the assignment?
Mhm.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Find something interesting to you. Reading. We've got the one that we just went through. And this letter in solidarity with Sci-Hub and Library Genesis, I thought you might enjoy. It's obviously written by an academic. It's beautifully penned, nicely constructed, and I think I actually have it up here somewhere.
I don't believe I've seen that one.
Maybe not.
Sci-Hub.
Take a look. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. Yeah, one of the parts he talks about here at the beginning is in Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's tale, The Little Prince meets a businessman who accumulates stars with the sole purpose of being able to buy more stars. Little Prince is perplexed. He owns only a flower, which he waters every day, 3 volcanoes, which he cleans every week. 'Tis of some use to my volcanoes, and it is of some use to my flower that I own them, he says. But you are of no use to the stars, you will. This is an interest. Starts with this weird little metaphor at the top of the thing.
Yeah.
And indeed, he points out that the Ellis, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Elsevier. It could be, if it's French, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it maybe the artist sign. I don't know.
Anyway, the largest scholarly publisher with this enormous profit margin. Of course, they don't want to see that disappear, and they're seeing it disappear, and that's what this is all about. But it is well stated and well constructed, and of course, the argument here is that the academics writing the papers do not get paid for their work. The referees who comment on it, this entire process of peer review is what papers have to go through before they come out in a scholarly publication. And the people doing the reviewing aren't paid for it. Nobody gets paid for it. But traditionally, there was a publisher who would put things out and would be paid by those who needed the paper. But it doesn't have to be done on paper anymore, and all of that can be done by a computer program. The question is whether that parasitic entity should continue to exist. Okay. And, there's Aaron Schwartz. Aaron Schwartz is actually mentioned in this one. Yeah. And then we have the references at the bottom. Worth reading if you find yourself in need of something interesting to read. Okay, so that's a reading here, and here's the paper. Do lurking learners contribute less? And I think it's actually a very nice little paper. As is the case with so many of these, it is
one of these types.
Tends to be dull. It tends to be dull. But in this one, I know the language is good because I wrote it. I didn't do the research. I didn't come up with concepts. I just put the language together. But did anybody get a chance to look at this one?
Where was it in the agenda? I didn't.
I'm sorry?
Where was it in the agenda? I didn't.
Take us to
I
it.
think we've already
Right
been
there.
over that.
How did we?
I'm sorry?
I think we've already been over that.
I think I mentioned its existence last time, but nobody had read it yet, so I left it in there. It's not critical that you read it necessarily, but it is. It's a well-done paper, about the length one would expect one of those papers to be. I think it's around 8,000 words, and it's. Let's see where. We have, of course, at the end of it, let's see if I can scroll. Takes a while for the resultant discussions. Type and nature of individual postage. What's important, perhaps, about this is all of the statistics involved in coming to a conclusion about what's taking place. And, of course, you have to understand how to put these statistics together, and in this case, the whole thing was done by organizing a classroom exercise, but it was an online classroom exercise specifically for teaching, but also for taking, gathering the statistics necessary to write this paper. But think about for a moment what you can do with a little Python program that knows how to go out onto the net and scour it for details that one could bring in and subject to this kind of statistical analysis. The kind of papers that you could put together, there would be so little that would be beyond your scope to do using the kind of tool that I'm describing in that paper. And I don't think that kind of tool is being used to any great extent yet. When I realized the effort that had to go into producing this paper by creating the classroom and defining the assignments and the way the students had to interact with each other in order to produce them, and then going through and counting the number of words in the postings in the forums, because that's really what this was all about. That kind of analysis is so readily doable online when you have that kind of tool handy. Anyway, that was one of the purposes I wanted to have this handy for. And also, this is hard to scroll, isn't it? Just wanted to look down at the, well, it takes a while for everything to arrive, doesn't it? This, by the way, I did download from SciUp. Sort of nice to have it there. All of that, again, is statistical, putting labels on and categories to each one of the postings, which was was put into the forum. I just wanted to get down here to here we are. The references at the end. So when you look at it here, 27 papers were referred to in this paper. These were other scholarly journal articles which had to be referred to. At $30 a piece, what does that add up to?
For how many papers?
27.
700.
Yeah,
No,
it's
810.
about $3,500 or so.
What? How many papers and
I'm just looking at
30
30 squared, and then taking a little off of it because it's 27 times 30. So it's going to be 3,600 minus a bit, 3,500 or something.
810.
That's a big investment. That's a big investment if you wanted to write a paper like this, and you had to go out and buy each one of those papers at $30 a piece. Of course, working in a large institution, those institutions have subscriptions that allow them to not get everything, but they are bulk subscriptions which allow access to some set of journals. And so some of them may have to be bought individually as well, and they may be paying for things that nobody ever uses. That's really the way it's put together. So I'm sorry, my point there is that here's a real scholarly journal article worth looking at, and it's enabled really by access to other scholarly journal articles. That's the way science works. That's the way upper level academia works. In order to go anywhere in grad school, that's what you do, is study those kinds of things and publish more of them. That's not necessarily a great way to go. In fact, you end up with some of the silliest little articles you can imagine, but just because of the structure and the demand, you can have some of the oddest little minutiae being covered and published. And at the end of every one of those papers, you've got a section on, this is what we weren't able to determine and what needs further examination, which opens the door to somebody coming along and say, okay, I'm going to write a paper on that. Okay. We have pretty much exhausted everything. I am assuming everybody has done everything from this point on down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. My big question to you was this of value to you? And did you manage to stay awake throughout?
Yes.
And what,
Yeah.
what direction we should go next? I appreciated the thought that I should sit down and write one of these as an example, and I hope that helped a little bit somehow or other.
Yeah.
But I hope it also inspired you to realize that you're perfectly capable of sitting down and writing something like that.
Yeah, it's just practice.
I see some minor tinges of skepticism.
Yeah, in his eyes.
I agree. No, I agree. Yeah. It takes time. You got to really think it out, plan it, and execute it.
I couldn't think of what I was going to write about. And it takes some time. You have that writer's block thing. Sometimes it's what gets you up in the morning and say, I got an idea. I know what I want to do with it. But I wasn't sure where this was going, and I'm not sure I got there. What I am sure is that if I sit down and write another one this week, it would be better than the last one. And so you got to get started so that you can go through that escalation, that improvement process. And of course, if you bring them in, we'll play around with them and see if we can't improve on things.
Sounds good.
Okay, so what do we do next? We have, I believe, graduation this year is very early. It's on
Yeah.
September 20th or
May
May the 20th.
Yeah.
We don't have to stop class then. We can go on into June.
Yeah. Classes usually stop June.
Right. No, I was expecting to do that. And I'd be glad to cover whatever you folks would like to cover in these last weeks. We could read something new. Of course, you're going to have all these papers that we're going to be going over.
True.
Try to make sure to get the arc in there. Something to pin it down at the beginning that encapsulates it at the end. I use the artichoke. Now, you can use whatever you like, but you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Something,
The hook, huh?
it's a part of it. It's the hook at the beginning, but it's also sort of, this is where we're going. This is a flavor of what it is. And then we go off, and then we come back and hit it again at the end. Every piece of art, really, in the Western tradition follows that arc. If you look at practically any musical piece, you will find it starts with a statement of the theme, perhaps a second theme, and then goes off onto a development section that does all kinds of things with them, and then comes back to a restatement of the theme at the end. That's called the sonata allegro form. The same thing tends to be found in plays. It tends to be found in novels. You have some sort of a repetition, some sort of recapitulation that takes you back to your initial founding foundation point, if you like.
Your initial point.
So you want that kind of an arc. Then we've got the detail. Now, a lot of these commenters said they really wanted something about that tells them about the writer.
And do you have a link in there to what you're talking about?
What do you want to link for?
The commentators, the commenters, and the essays.
Okay,
Do you have
if you look into the 100 winning essays, it's linked in there.
Okay.
You'll find they're interspersed after each one of the essays. You'll
Okay,
have the
cool.
comment. And indeed, those comments I think are more useful than the Stinson comments, because this came from an article, and that article simply quoted one of the admissions officers over and over again, and he's the one who made grammar mistakes and said some sort of stupid things. So I don't think that one was very useful. Most of the others I think are better. But see if you can incorporate all of those things, detail, and give your reader something challenging to think about. Give your reader perhaps an artist that readers never heard of, or a scientist that readers never heard of. You see what I mean? But do your research. Find something interesting. Okay. Requests for next time. You don't have enough homework, I'm sure, because you finished everything, right?
Almost everything.
Okay, well,
Throw some stuff at us and we'll absorb.
I'm sorry?
I said throw some stuff our way and we will absorb.
Okay, I will hunt around. What would you like? I'm afraid I'm
Something on physics, I guess.
something on physics. Okay. I just discovered a lot of nice lectures by this fellow, Sean Carroll, and I listened to several of them. I talked to some of my old college friends who told me they regard him, one of them certainly, regard him as really the shining light in physics today, and really the genius in the subject. His language, however, is nothing terribly special. It's competent, but it's not the kind of language I would necessarily seek out, if you see my point. I don't mind throwing some of his material up there. I prefer the language of Stephen Wolfram, for example. But I'll see what I can find.
All right.
So physics.
Business, yeah.
I don't know what I can find in the business realm. I could hunt around a little bit. And
Topics for each of the majors.
yeah, well, that's what I'm
That would be
thinking.
cool,
I'm
actually.
trying to think. Archaeology. What can we do in that realm? Tell you what, this is a terrible thing to ask, but I ask it every week anyway. Help me out.
Okay.
Do some research. See if
All
you
right.
can find people in
All right.
your fields that are writing and speaking well that we can study. I'll do the same.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
You want some more Shakespeare?
No, thank you.
Yeah.
This summer, by the way, the Independent Shakespeare Company is putting on Richard III and Christ. It's free in Griffith Park.
Oh, cool.
I'll send out.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for the heads up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Have a wonderful week.
Okay, bringing to an end this week's College Prep English class for homeschoolers.